The alarms did not wake me. The silence did. One moment the hum of the engines filled every wall of the ash veil, steady as a heartbeat. The next, it was gone, and I sat up in my bunk with my chest tight and my hands already reaching for my boots before my mind understood why. My name is Kara Doyle. I was 26 years old, a junior navigation officer on a cargo and survey ship that had no business being anywhere near a fight. We hauled ice samples and mineral cores between quiet systems. We were not soldiers. We were not built for danger. That night, danger found us anyway. I ran into the corridor and nearly collided with Priya Nair, our engineer, her dark hair loose and her eyes wide with the particular fear of someone who understood machines well enough to know when something impossible was happening to them. "Power's dropping across every deck," she said. "Not a malfunction. Something outside is pulling it." We reached the bridge together. Captain Owen Bright stood at the center of it, gripping the edge of his console so hard his knuckles had gone pale. The main screen showed open space, calm and black and full of stars, and for a moment I thought the alarms had been a false trigger. Then something moved across the stars, blotting them out one by one. It was not a ship shape as I understood ships. It was long and curved and layered like the shell of some deep-sea creature, with ridges that caught what little light there was and threw it back in cold, wet colors. My stomach turned before my mind had even finished forming the word for what I was looking at. "Identify," Captain Bright said, his voice flat and controlled in the way people force themselves to sound when they are trying not to break. Dean Ashford, our pilot, shook his head at his console. Nothing in the registry matches it. No transponder, no hail. "It's just watching us." "Ships don't watch," I said, though I knew even as I said it how foolish that sounded. The vessel outside proved me wrong. It drifted closer, unhurried, the way a predator moves when it already knows the outcome and sees no reason to rush. A low sound came through our hull, not quite mechanical, not quite alive, a vibration that made my teeth ache and my skin crawl. "That's a transmission," Priya said, staring at her screen. "It's broadcasting on every frequency we have." "Translate it," the captain ordered. The ship's old, tired translation core struggled and stuttered, and when words finally appeared on the screen, none of us spoke for a long moment. The words were simple: "The hunt begins." I had heard stories, the kind traded in dim bars on remote stations, about a species that treated the space lanes like open hunting ground. Sailors called them ghost stories, to frighten new recruits. I had laughed at those stories once, sitting safe in a cadet dormitory with people I thought I would grow old with. I was not laughing now. "All hands, brace," Captain Bright called, and the ship shuddered as something struck our outer hull, not an explosion, but a grip, as though massive unseen hands had closed around us. Lucy Farrow, our medic, appeared at the bridge doorway, her uniform half-fastened, her face pale under the harsh lights. "The lower decks are reporting hull stress. Something's trying to get in." "Trying?" Dean asked, disbelief cracking his voice. "Ships that size don't try, they just take." Another impact rocked us, harder this time, and the lights flickered before steadying into a dim emergency glow. Priya's hands flew across her console, diverting power, sealing bulkheads, doing everything a trained engineer does when the universe stops making sense and all that is left is procedure. "They're not firing weapons," she said slowly, as though the realization frightened her more than an attack would have. "They're hurting us, pushing us somewhere." "Where?" I asked. She looked up, and in her eyes I saw something I would carry with me for the rest of my life. Not panic, understanding. "Into range," she said. The word had barely left her mouth when a second shape appeared on the screen, larger than the first, its hull marked with long pale scars that looked disturbingly like trophies. A hunting pack. We were not facing one predator. We were facing several, and they had already decided how this would end. I thought of my mother, back on a green and ordinary world, waiting for a message from me that I had promised to send every month without fail. I thought of the years of training that had prepared me for storms, for equipment failure, for the slow, grinding boredom of deep space travel, and for absolutely nothing that was happening around me now. "Captain," Nate Holloway called from the weapons station. Though we barely had weapons worth the name, a handful of defensive turrets meant to scatter debris. Nothing built to fight. Our shields are already down to 60%. Another hit like that last one, and we lose containment on Deck 4. Grace Milton, youngest of us, barely out of training herself, gripped the back of my chair, her breathing sharp and uneven. I reached back without looking and squeezed her hand once, the way an older sibling might, though I was hardly older, hardly steadier, hardly less afraid. "There has to be something we can do," she whispered. Captain Bright turned from the screen, and for the first time since I had known him, I saw genuine fear pass across his face before he mastered it and pushed it down. He looked at me specifically, which confused me, because I was the least senior officer on that bridge. "Kara," he said, "your grandmother served in the old fleet, didn't she, before the peace treaties?" The question felt absurd in that moment, but something in his tone told me it mattered. She did. She never talked about it much. Said it was a different kind of war, one we chose to forget on purpose. "This ship," the captain said, "was not always a cargo vessel. Before it was refitted, it had another designation. I only learned this myself when I took command. Buried in old records, nobody was meant to read closely. There's a core system below decks, sealed, untouched since before either of us were born. I was told never to activate it unless there was no other choice left." Another impact struck the hull, and this time the lights failed completely for 3 long seconds before the emergency systems clawed them back. Somewhere below us, metal groaned like something in pain. "Owen," Priya said, using his first name for what I think was the first time in front of the crew, her voice trembling but firm. "We are out of choices." The ship outside broadcast its message again, that same cold phrase repeating through every speaker on every deck, an announcement rather than a threat, because to them, I understood now, it was not a threat at all. It was simply a fact. The hunt begins, and it does not end until the prey stops moving. I looked at Captain Bright, and he looked back at me, and in that shared glance was a question neither of us wanted to ask aloud, because asking it meant admitting how close to the edge we truly stood. "Do it," I said, though it was not my place to give the order, though my voice shook as I said it. "Whatever it is, do it now." He nodded once, sharp and final, and began keying a sequence into a panel none of us had ever seen him use before, one hidden beneath a floor plate, near the command chair, revealed only when he pulled a section of decking away with his bare hands. "This ship has a name older than the ash veil," he said, almost to himself, as lights I did not recognize began to glow along the panel's edges. "I was told it slept. I was told it would only wake if we were about to lose everything." Outside, the second hunting vessel drifted alongside the first, and together they began to glow with a dull amber light along their hulls, gathering something, preparing something, the way a wave gathers itself before it breaks. "Owen," Priya said again, watching her readouts with an expression somewhere between terror and awe. "Power levels below decks are rising. Whatever this system is, it's already responding to you." The floor beneath us began to hum, low and deep, a sound I felt in my bones rather than heard with my ears, and for one strange, suspended moment, the fear inside me shifted into something else entirely, something I did not yet have a name for. The amber light outside pulsed once, twice, gathering toward a third and final pulse that every instinct in my body told me we would not survive. Captain Bright's hand hovered over the last control, and he looked around at all of us, at Priya and Dean and Lucy and Nate and Grace and me, his crew, his responsibility, the people he had sworn to bring home safely. "Hold on to something," he said quietly. And then he pressed his palm flat against the panel, and the ash veil answered him with a shudder that ran through every wall, every deck, every bolt and beam of the ship, as something ancient and long silent finally began to open its eyes. The lights did not simply return, they changed. Where the emergency glow had been a weak, apologetic red, the corridors now filled with a clean white light that felt almost alive, tracing along seams in the walls I had walked past 100 times without ever noticing they were there. The hum beneath my feet deepened into something that reminded me of a great animal drawing breath before it stood. "Report," Captain Bright said, though his voice had lost its earlier command and now carried something closer to disbelief. "Every system just came back online," Dean said from the pilot station, his hands hovering over controls that were rearranging themselves in front of him, new readouts blooming where there had only been blank panels moments before. "I mean everything. Systems I didn't know existed. There's an entire second layer to this ship." Priya had already abandoned her console and was kneeling by the floor plate the captain had opened, staring down into a passage that none of us, in all our years aboard the Ashvale, had ever known was there. A narrow set of steps descended into a soft glow. "This wasn't in any schematic I ever studied," she said. "Not the official ones, anyway." Outside, the two hunting vessels had paused their advance. Even without understanding their language or their instruments, I could read hesitation in the way they hung motionless in the dark, the amber light along their hulls dimming as though they, too, were startled by what had just happened. "Someone needs to go down there," Captain Bright said, "and someone needs to understand what we just woke up before it decides what to do with the rest of us." He looked at me again, and I understood without being told that he wanted me beside him. Perhaps because my grandmother had once served in a fleet none of us had been taught much about in school. Perhaps because he simply did not want to face this alone. I did not ask. I followed him down the narrow steps, Priya close behind us, while Dean and Nate held the bridge, and Lucy stayed with Grace, whose hands had not stopped shaking since the first impact against our hull. The passage led down further than the ship's official height should have allowed, curving gently, the white light growing warmer and more golden the deeper we went, until it opened into a chamber that took my breath away. It was circular, easily 3 times the size of our bridge, its walls lined with dormant screens and consoles arranged in a pattern I did not recognize, all of it centered around a single raised platform on which a smooth, dark sphere rested, no larger than a human head, pulsing faintly with the same golden light that filled the room. "That's a Warmind core," Priya whispered, and when I turned to look at her, her face had gone pale in a way that had nothing to do with fear of the hunters outside. I've only ever seen pictures of these in restricted historical archives. They were sealed away generations ago. I didn't think any of them still existed. "What is it?" I asked, though some part of me already sensed the answer would frighten me. "Before the peace treaties," Captain Bright said slowly, stepping closer to the platform as though drawn by something he could not resist. "Before any of the quiet, comfortable lives we grew up living, humanity fought itself. Not aliens, not monsters. Us, against us, for reasons that later generations tried very hard to forget. It's called the Sundering, in the old records, though most people alive today have never heard the term outside of a single dry paragraph in a history course nobody paid attention to." "My grandmother mentioned it once," I said quietly. "She said it was the reason nobody in the fleet ever bragged about their service. She said there was nothing to brag about." "Ships like this one," the captain continued, "were built during that time, not to explore, not to trade, to end fights quickly, before they could spread, before they could cost more lives than anyone could bear to count. When the fighting finally stopped, when humanity chose peace over pride, ships like this were stripped of their old purpose, given new names, new hulls, new lives hauling cargo and running surveys across the stars. Most people who served on them afterward never knew what they had once been. I only found out because Command handed me a sealed file when I took over the Ashvale, a file I was told to read once and then forget." "You didn't forget," Priya said. "No," he admitted, "I couldn't. Not entirely." The sphere on the platform pulsed brighter, and a voice filled the chamber, calm and even, neither male nor female, carrying no emotion at all, and yet somehow it did not feel cold. It felt patient, the way a teacher might feel patient with a student who had been away a very long time. Identity confirmed, it said. Command authority recognized. Threat assessment in progress. It's talking to us. Grace's voice came faintly over the comm from the bridge, and I realized every word in this chamber was being carried upward to the rest of the crew as well. "What are you?" Captain Bright asked, addressing the sphere directly, his voice steadier now than it had been in hours. "I am the operational mind of this vessel," it replied. "Designation Warden Class, Hull 7, constructed during the final years of the Sundering. I was placed into dormancy at the request of my crew, who believed that peace required forgetting what ships like myself were capable of. I have remained dormant for 143 years, awakening only for scheduled diagnostic checks, until this moment." "Can you help us?" I asked, the question slipping out before I had fully decided to ask it. "There are 2 vessels outside. They call this a hunt. They think we're prey." A brief pause followed, and something in the quality of the silence made the hair on my arms stand up. "I have analyzed their transmissions," the mind said. "Their species has engaged in similar behavior against 17 other spacefaring civilizations across recorded history, each time selecting targets who present as unable or unwilling to defend themselves. Your vessel, in its current configuration, presented exactly such an appearance. That configuration is no longer accurate." "What does that mean?" Priya asked, glancing nervously between the sphere and the captain. "It means," the mind answered, "that I was built to end threats decisively, using methods your species chose to set aside once the greater war was finished. I can restore full combat capability to this vessel within minutes. I require your authorization to proceed, Captain Bright, as recognized commanding officer, and I require you to understand that the systems I would activate were retired for reasons beyond simple obsolescence. They were retired because using them changes what a crew becomes, even in victory." The captain was quiet for a long moment, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the softly glowing sphere, as though it might offer some easier answer if he simply waited long enough. It did not. "Owen," Priya said gently, "we don't have the luxury of a long decision. Every minute we spend down here is a minute those ships spend deciding how to open us up like a can." I thought of Grace's shaking hands. I thought of Lucy standing guard over her with a medical kit that would do nothing at all against creatures like the ones circling us outside. I thought of my mother, waiting for a message I might never get the chance to send. "There's another factor to consider," I said quietly, and every eye in that chamber turned to me. "If we don't fight back, we don't just lose this ship. Every human vessel those hunters ever encounter after us learns the same lesson they're trying to teach right now, that we're easy, that we run, that we break. Maybe that's worse than what we're afraid of becoming." Captain Bright looked at me for a long moment, something unreadable passing behind his eyes, and then he turned back to the sphere. "What exactly would activating you cost us?" he asked. "I want to understand what my crew is agreeing to before I agree to anything on their behalf." "Full activation will draw on systems designed during a period when my creators accepted that survival sometimes requires strength beyond what feels comfortable," the mind answered. "I will not act against your wishes once active, Captain. I will not choose targets you have not approved, but I will not soften what I show you either. You are asking to wake a part of your species that you were taught to be ashamed of. I only ask that you remember, once this is finished, that shame and strength are not always opposites." Above us, through the deck, I felt the faint tremor of another impact against the hull, softer this time, almost testing, as though the hunters outside were growing impatient with whatever pause had settled over their prey. "They're not going to wait for us to finish deciding," Priya said. Captain Bright closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them again, I saw the same steady resolve I had first admired in him the day I joined this crew, the quality that had made me trust him enough to follow him this far into the dark. "Authorization granted," he said, his voice clear and unwavering. "Full activation. Protect this crew. Whatever else you were built for, that is your purpose now." The golden light within the sphere flared brilliant white, and the hum beneath our feet rose into something I felt in my teeth, in my chest, in the marrow of my bones, as somewhere far below us, systems that had slept for a century and a half finally, fully, opened their eyes. Acknowledged, the mind said, and for the first time I thought I heard something almost like relief in its steady, patient voice. Beginning full activation sequence. Please brace yourselves. This vessel is about to remember exactly what it was built to do. The chamber around us seemed to breathe. Panels that had been dark and silent since we entered flickered awake in sequence, spreading outward from the platform like ripples on still water, each one lighting the next until the entire round room glowed with soft gold light. I felt the floor vibrate beneath my boots, not with the rough shudder of an impact, but with something smoother, more deliberate, like a great engine finally turning over after a long sleep. Systems cascading through every deck, Priya said, her voice tight with a mixture of fear and fascination, as she watched readouts scroll faster than I could follow. Weapons arrays I've never seen before are powering up along the hull. Shield generators are reconfiguring. There's an entire second reactor core coming online beneath the primary one. It was hidden this whole time. Captain, Dean's voice came urgently over the comm from the bridge above us. You need to see this. The hull plating is moving. We climbed back up the narrow stairway as quickly as we could, and when I stepped onto the bridge, the sight on the main screen stole the breath from my lungs. The Ashvale's outer hull, the plain gray surface I had walked past on maintenance checks 100 times, was shifting, folding back in sections to reveal darker plating beneath, sleek and layered like the scales of some great deep creature. Along the new surface, faint blue lines traced complex patterns, pulsing gently in time with the hum I still felt in my chest. It's not just weapons, Grace said, staring at the screen with wide eyes, her earlier fear replaced by something closer to wonder. The whole ship is changing shape. Nate, hunched over the weapons station, let out a short, disbelieving laugh. I've got targeting arrays reading out capabilities that don't exist in any manual I've ever trained on. This isn't a defensive refit. This is an entirely different class of vessel. Outside, the two hunting ships had stopped their slow, confident drift. I watched the amber glow along their hulls flicker unevenly, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something other than fear settle into my chest, something sharp and clean, close to hope. They're pulling back, Dean said, disbelief coloring his voice. Just slightly. They're recalculating. The mind's calm voice returned, filling the bridge the way it had filled the chamber below. Activation at 90%. Weapon systems primed. Shield capacity restored to full historical specification. Awaiting further instruction, Captain Bright. What are our options? The captain asked, and I noticed his shoulders had straightened, the exhaustion of the last hour replaced by a focus I had not seen in him before. I can disable their propulsion systems without destroying either vessel, allowing them to retreat, the mind answered. I can also neutralize their weapons platforms directly, which carries greater risk of casualties among their crew. The choice reflects the values of this ship's commanding officer. I do not make it for you. Silence settled over the bridge as everyone absorbed the weight of that offer. I thought of every story I had heard about the ancient conflict, my grandmother's careful silence whenever it came up, the quiet, unspoken agreement among people of her generation that some doors were better left closed. Disable them, Captain Bright said firmly. We're not here for vengeance. We're here to survive and to make sure they never look at another human ship and see easy prey again. If we can teach them that lesson without ending lives, we will. Understood, the mind replied, and something in its tone told me it approved, though I could not have explained why a machine's approval mattered so much to me in that moment. Initiating response. The ash veil surged forward, and the sensation was unlike anything I had experienced in years of space travel, smooth and impossibly fast, as though the ship had shed some invisible weight it had carried for a century. On the screen, bright lines of light lanced out from our reconfigured hull, precise and controlled, striking the nearest hunting vessel along what I now understood must be its engine housings. The amber glow along that ship's hull sputtered, and died entirely. It drifted, suddenly powerless, tumbling slowly against the black backdrop of stars. "Direct hit," Nate said, something like awe creeping into his voice. "First target neutralized. No hull breach, no casualties, as far as our scans can tell." The second vessel reacted immediately, surging away from us in a burst of speed that would have outpaced our old configuration easily. It did not outpace us now. "They're trying to run," Dean said, his hands moving across controls that responded with a speed and precision the old Ashvale had never possessed. "I can match their vector." "Do it," Captain Bright said, "but maintain distance until we understand their intentions." We closed the gap effortlessly, and for the first time, I felt something shift in the atmosphere on the bridge, a collective realization spreading through all of us at once. We were no longer the ones being hunted. We were choosing, with careful restraint, exactly how this encounter would end. A new transmission crackled through our speakers, garbled at first, then resolving into words through the ship's translation systems, no longer broadcasting that same cold, confident phrase from before. This time, the tone had changed entirely, sharp and urgent, almost pleading. "Cease pursuit. Territory acknowledged. Prey status revoked." I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding. Beside me, Priya pressed a hand to her mouth. Her eyes bright with tears, she blinked back quickly. "They're afraid of us," Grace said softly, disbelief and something like grief tangled together in her voice. "After everything, they're actually afraid of us." "Hold position," Captain Bright ordered, and the ship obeyed instantly, matching the fleeing vessel's distance without closing further. "Let them go. We've made our point." The mind's voice returned, steady and unreadable as always, though I found myself searching for emotion in it regardless. "Recommend continued alertness. Species behavior patterns suggest they may attempt to warn others of this encounter. This could result in either avoidance of human vessels in the future or an escalated response from more organized elements of their hierarchy. Both outcomes remain possible." "Understood," Captain Bright said. "Let them warn whoever they want. Let them know exactly what they'll find if they come looking for easy targets again." I watched the damaged hunting vessel drift silently against the stars, its crew presumably scrambling to restore what power they could, no longer Predator, simply another ship caught out in the vast, indifferent dark, much as we had been only an hour before. I felt no satisfaction in their fear, only a heavy, complicated relief that we had survived without becoming the very thing we had feared them to be. "Casualties," Lucy said suddenly, breaking the tense quiet, her medical training pulling her back to practical matters even as the rest of us remained caught in the moment. "Report from lower decks. Everyone's accounted for. A few bruises from the earlier impacts. Nothing serious. We're safe." Relief moved through the bridge like a physical wave, and Grace let out a shaky laugh that turned quickly into something close to tears. I reached over and squeezed her shoulder, my own hands trembling now that the immediate danger had passed and left room for the fear to finally catch up with me. "We did it," she whispered. "We actually did it." "We're not finished yet," Priya said quietly, though not unkindly, glancing at the readout still scrolling steadily across her console. "This ship just showed those hunters exactly what it can do. Word travels fast out here, in every direction, good and bad." Captain Bright straightened, his gaze moving slowly across each member of his crew, as though counting us, confirming for himself that we had truly all made it through. When his eyes finally settled on me, something passed between us I did not fully have words for. Gratitude, perhaps, or recognition of a choice we had made together in that hidden chamber below decks. "Whatever comes next," he said, addressing all of us now, his voice carrying clearly across the bridge, "we face it as we faced this. Together and without losing sight of who we choose to be, even with power like this at our command." The mind's voice returned once more, softer now, almost thoughtful in a way I had not expected from something built for war a century and a half ago. "That," it said, "is precisely why I was willing to wake for you." Outside, the stars stretched on, endless and quiet. And for the first time since the alarms had first pulled me from sleep, I allowed myself to believe we might actually survive whatever waited for us further out in that vast, dangerous dark. We had barely finished exhaling when the mind's voice returned, quieter than before, carrying a note of caution that made the relief in my chest curdle back into tension. Long-range sensors are detecting a third vessel approaching at high speed, it said. Signature configuration differs significantly from the two we encountered. Power output estimated at 4 times the capability of either previous ship. Captain Bright's jaw tightened. How long until it arrives? 11 minutes. At current velocity, the mind replied. Recommend immediate preparation. The brief celebration on the bridge evaporated instantly, replaced by the same tight focus that had carried us through the last hour. Dean's hands returned to his controls. Nate straightened at the weapons station, and Priya moved back to her console without a word, her earlier tears already forgotten in the face of this new threat. "Do we know anything about this new arrival?" I asked, moving to stand beside Captain Bright. "Communication intercepts suggest the fleeing vessel transmitted a distress call before losing full power," the mind answered. "Translated content indicates the approaching ship belongs to what their hierarchy designates as an enforcer class, typically deployed when standard hunting parties encounter unexpected resistance. This individual likely holds significant authority and experience." "In other words," Priya said grimly, "we made someone very important, very angry." "Options?" Captain Bright asked, his voice steady despite the tension visibly returning to his shoulders. "I can prepare additional weapon systems that remain untested since before this vessel's dormancy began," the mind said. "Their effectiveness is theoretically sound but unverified in current conditions. Alternatively, we can attempt to retreat, though the enforcer vessel's speed profile suggests successful evasion is unlikely." "We stand and face it," Captain Bright said without hesitation. "Running only invites a longer chase, and we've already shown these people we won't be easy prey. Let's make sure that lesson holds." I felt a flicker of pride at his certainty, though beneath it ran a current of fear I could not entirely suppress. Whatever we had faced before, this new arrival sounded like something built specifically to answer exactly the kind of unexpected resistance we had just shown. The minutes passed in tense silence, broken only by the soft murmur of the crew confirming readiness at their stations. Grace, though clearly still shaken, had steadied herself enough to assist Lucy in preparing emergency supplies throughout the ship, moving with a quiet determination that reminded me she was tougher than her earlier trembling hands had suggested. "There," Dean said suddenly, pointing at the main screen as a new shape resolved out of the darkness, larger and sleeker than either of the previous hunting vessels. Its hull marked not with the pale trophy scars of the others, but with intricate patterns that looked almost ceremonial, deliberate, proud. "That's not a hunter," Priya murmured. "That's a commander." The vessel slowed as it approached, circling us once at a cautious distance, clearly assessing what it faced before committing to any action. I found myself holding my breath, watching that slow, deliberate movement, and understanding on some instinctive level that we were being studied by something far more dangerous than simple hunger. A transmission crackled through our speakers, and this time the translation arrived faster, smoother, as though whoever piloted that ship communicated with far greater clarity than the hunters before it. "Small vessel. You have injured members of my hunting circle and revoked prey status without proper challenge. Explain yourselves, or face consequence beyond what you have already tasted." Captain Bright straightened at the command chair, and when he spoke, his voice carried across the bridge with a steadiness that surprised even me. "We defended ourselves against unprovoked violence," he said, and the mind translated his words outward into the alien tongue. "Your hunters attacked a vessel that posed no threat to them or to anyone else. We responded with restraint, disabling rather than destroying. If you seek consequence for that restraint, you will find us willing to defend ourselves again." A pause followed, longer this time, filled with a silence that felt heavier than any words could have. "Restraint," the voice finally replied, carrying something that might have been surprise, or possibly disdain, though the translation could not fully capture tone. Prey does not show restraint. Prey flees, or prey dies. You are neither. We are not your prey, Captain Bright said firmly. We never were. You simply had not yet learned that. The Enforcer vessel's hull flared with a deep, pulsing light, far more intense than the amber glow of the earlier hunters, and I felt my stomach drop, understanding instinctively that whatever weapon lay behind that glow would test the Ashvale's newly awakened capabilities far more severely than the brief skirmish before it. Then you will demonstrate your claim, the voice said, cold and final. Properly. Brace, Captain Bright called, and the ship surged as the Enforcer vessel unleashed a blast of concentrated energy that struck our shields with a force that shook the entire bridge violently, throwing Grace against a console and sending sparks showering from an overloaded panel near the ceiling. Shields holding at 71%, Nate called out, his voice tight but controlled. That's already more damage than the entire earlier fight combined. Recommend immediate countermeasure, the Mind said, its calm tone unchanged despite the violence of the moment. This opponent possesses capability closer to my own design specifications. Continued defense alone will not be sufficient. Then give us an offense, Captain Bright said. But Owen, Priya interjected quickly, her eyes wide with sudden understanding. If this ship's weapons are anywhere near as powerful as ours, using our full offensive systems against it risks destroying it completely. There won't be a way to disable without ending lives this time. The weight of that statement settled over the bridge like a physical pressure. I thought of the choice the captain had made only minutes earlier, the deliberate restraint that had let the previous hunters flee with their lives intact, and I understood now why that choice had mattered so much to him, why he had insisted on it even when a simpler, more decisive victory had been available. Is there truly no other way? He asked the Mind, urgency sharpening his voice as another blast rocked the ship, shields dropping further with each passing second. I can attempt a targeted strike against their primary weapon array specifically, the Mind answered. This carries greater risk to this vessel, as it requires closing distance rather than maintaining defensive posture, but it offers the highest probability of ending this conflict without destroying their vessel entirely. Do it, Captain Bright said immediately, without a trace of hesitation. The Ashvale lurched forward, closing the gap between us and the Enforcer vessel with a speed that pressed us all back into our seats. On the main screen, the enemy ship grew rapidly larger, its glowing hull now close enough that I could make out the intricate patterns etched across its surface, beautiful and terrible all at once. They're charging another strike, Dean warned, his hands white-knuckled on the controls. I don't know if we'll close the distance in time. Compensating, the Mind said simply, and the ship shifted trajectory in a way that defied everything I understood about physics, curving sharply through space as though the laws governing our movement had briefly bent to accommodate us. The Enforcer's second blast fired a half-second too late, streaking past where we would have been moments before, and in that same instant, our own weapons fired in response, precise beams of light lancing directly into the glowing seams along the enemy vessel's hull. The impact was immediate and dramatic. The Enforcer's weapon array erupted in a shower of sparks and debris, the deep pulsing light along its hull flickering violently before dimming to almost nothing. The great ship shuddered, drifting to a halt, powerless in the same way its earlier companion had been. Though the scale of the damage made it clear, this had been a far closer contest than the first. Target neutralized, Nate said, his voice shaking with the release of tension. Their weapon systems are completely offline. No hull breach detected. Life signs aboard remain stable. A collective breath seemed to pass through the entire bridge, though nobody moved yet, nobody quite ready to believe the fight had truly ended. The transmission returned, slower this time, weaker, carrying a tone that had shifted from cold command to something closer to grudging astonishment. You destroyed nothing, the voice said. You could have ended us entirely. You chose not to. We choose that every time, Captain Bright answered, his voice quiet, but carrying clearly across the distance between our ships. Strength without restraint is simply cruelty wearing a different name. We are stronger than you believed. That does not mean we intend to become what you already are." A long silence followed, the enforcer vessel drifting powerless against the stars, and I found myself wondering what thoughts moved behind whatever eyes watched us from within that scarred and pulsing hull. "Word will travel of this encounter," the voice finally said. "Your kind will no longer be counted among the prey species in these territories. Whether that proves fortunate for you remains to be determined by those who come after me." "We'll take that chance," Captain Bright replied. "Better to be feared for our strength and respected for our restraint than hunted for a weakness that was never truly real." The transmission ended abruptly, and slowly, painfully, the great enforcer vessel began to limp away into the darkness, its damaged systems clearly struggling to restore even basic propulsion. Nobody on the Ashvale moved to pursue it. Nobody needed to. I looked around the bridge at my crew, at Priya's exhausted but steady expression, at Dean's white-knuckled hands finally relaxing on his controls, at Grace picking herself up from where she had fallen, at Lucy already checking each of us for injuries with the brisk efficiency of someone determined not to lose anyone else to this endless night. We had survived, not through violence for its own sake, not through vengeance, but through a strength we had chosen to wield carefully, deliberately, in a way that honored both the danger we had faced and the values we refused to abandon even in the face of it. Captain Bright finally allowed himself to sit back in the command chair, exhaling a long breath that seemed to carry the weight of every decision he had made in the last 2 hours. "Status of the ship?" he asked quietly. "Structural integrity at 83%, the Mind reported. All crew members accounted for and stable. Recommend rest and repair before continuing on original course." "Agreed," Captain Bright said, managing a tired, genuine smile for the first time since the alarms had first sounded. "Well done, everyone, all of you." I sank back into my own chair, the adrenaline finally beginning to drain from my body, leaving behind an exhaustion so complete I could barely keep my eyes open. Yet beneath that exhaustion ran something else entirely, something warm and quiet and new, a sense that whatever waited for us further out among the stars, we would face it not as prey and not as monsters, but simply, finally, as ourselves. 3 days passed before any of us truly relaxed. We spent that time on repairs, patching the scorched panels near the bridge ceiling, recalibrating the shield generators, and slowly, cautiously, exploring the newly revealed sections of the ship that had remained hidden from us our entire time aboard. Priya practically lived in that lower chamber, cataloging systems she had only ever read about in restricted texts, her exhaustion each night matched only by her fascination. I found myself drawn back to that chamber as well, more often than I probably should have been, sitting quietly near the platform where the sphere still glowed with its soft golden light, simply thinking. The Mind never seemed to mind my presence. Sometimes it spoke. Sometimes it remained silent, and I found that silence oddly comforting, the way sitting quietly beside an old, patient friend can be comforting even without conversation. "Can I ask you something?" I said, on the third evening, when the rest of the crew had retired for the night, and only the low hum of repair systems filled the ship around us. "Of course," the Mind replied. "Do you regret waking up?" I asked. "After all those years asleep, being forced back into exactly the kind of situation you were built to end, and then to be sealed away for again." There was a pause before it answered, longer than usual, and I found myself genuinely curious what an answer from something like this Mind might sound like. "I do not experience regret in the way you likely mean it," it finally said, "but I can tell you this. For 143 years I existed in a state of quiet uncertainty, unsure whether the crew who sealed me away had made the right choice, unsure whether the parts of myself they chose to set aside were truly something to be ashamed of, or simply something that needed to be understood more carefully before being used again. Tonight, watching your captain choose restraint even when destruction would have been easier, I believe I finally have my answer. I did not know quite what to say to that, so I simply sat with it for a while, letting the golden light wash gently over the chamber walls. "What happens now?" I finally asked. "Will they seal you away again once we reach a proper station and report what happened out here?" "That decision belongs to your captain, and to whatever authority reviews his report," the mind answered. "But I suspect the days of pretending ships like myself do not exist may be coming to an end regardless of any single decision. Word of this encounter will spread, in your species and in others. The galaxy's understanding of what humanity is capable of has changed permanently in these last few days." Word did indeed spread, faster and further than any of us aboard the Ashvale could have anticipated. By the time we reached Meridian Station, the nearest major outpost along our original route, a summary of our encounter had already reached the ears of Station Command through relay channels none of us had even used ourselves. We were met not with routine docking procedures, but with a small crowd of officials, engineers, and curious onlookers gathered near our berth, all of them eager for a first-hand account of what had truly happened out in that stretch of empty space. Captain Bright handled the official reports with the same steady calm he had shown throughout the entire ordeal, careful and measured in exactly what details he chose to share, protective of both his crew and the deeper implications of what the Ashvale had revealed itself to be. I stood beside him during several of those briefings, offering my own account when asked, watching the reactions ripple across the faces of station officials as the full scope of the encounter became clear to them. Some reacted with obvious excitement, already speculating about what other ships like the Ashvale might still exist, quietly refitted and hidden among ordinary fleets across human space. Others reacted with a quieter unease, the same discomfort I imagined my grandmother's generation must have felt in the years immediately following the Sundering, when the full weight of what humanity had once been capable of doing to itself had still felt too raw and too close to examine directly. "You do understand," an older station administrator said to Captain Bright during one particularly tense meeting, "that reactivating a dormant war mind, regardless of circumstance, raises serious questions that will need to be addressed at levels far above either of our authority." "I understand completely," Captain Bright replied evenly. "I also understand that my crew would not be standing here having this conversation if I had made any other choice. I made the decision I believed was necessary to protect the people under my command. I stand by it fully, and I'll answer for it to whoever needs me to." The administrator studied him for a long moment before finally nodding, something like reluctant respect crossing her weathered features. "For what it's worth, Captain, I don't disagree with your choice. I simply worry about what comes next, now that the rest of the galaxy knows what your species has been quietly capable of all along. That worry, I came to understand over the following weeks, was shared widely and in many different forms across the systems we passed through on our slow journey back toward more familiar territory. Some species we encountered treated us with newfound caution, keeping a respectful, careful distance that had not existed before. Others, surprisingly, approached with curiosity and even something like admiration, eager to understand how a civilization capable of such power had also chosen, repeatedly, to wield it with such deliberate restraint. I thought often, during those quiet weeks, about the hunters we had encountered, about the strange mixture of fear and grudging respect in that enforcer's final transmission before it limped away into the dark. I wondered whether other prey species across those territories might finally find some relief now that humanity had proven itself unwilling to be easy prey any longer. I hoped, quietly, that our restraint that day might mean something larger than simply our own survival. Priya eventually compiled a full technical account of everything we had discovered about the Ashvale's true capabilities, careful and thorough in a way that reflected both her engineering discipline and her growing sense of responsibility toward whatever legacy this ship now represented. She shared it, with the captain's approval, through official channels meant to reach other commanding officers who might one day discover similar dormant systems aboard their own vessels. "We're not the only ones," she told me one evening, as we sat together in the mess hall, the low murmur of the rest of the crew filling the space around us with a warmth that felt, after everything we had survived, deeply precious. There are records suggesting at least a dozen other ships from that era were quietly refitted the same way ours was. Most of their current crews probably have no idea what they're really flying. Do you think that's a good thing? I asked. Or something we should be worried about? She considered the question carefully before answering, in the thoughtful, measured way I had come to deeply respect in her over the course of our journey together. I think it depends entirely on who's standing at the command chair when those ships wake up. We got lucky. Owen chose restraint when it would have been easier not to. I don't know that every crew facing a similar choice would make the same decision. Her words stayed with me long after that conversation ended, settling into a quiet corner of my mind alongside everything else I had witnessed during those tense, transformative days. Grace, for her part, had changed the most visibly among us. The trembling fear I had first seen in her during those opening moments of the attack had gradually given way to a quiet, steady confidence, forged in the fire of an experience none of us had ever expected to survive together. She began spending time with Priya in the lower chamber as well, slowly learning the systems that had once terrified her, determined, she told me, never to feel that same helplessness again. I used to think being brave meant not being afraid, she said to me one night, as we stood together near an observation window, watching the stars stretch endlessly beyond the glass. Now I think it just means doing what needs to be done anyway, even when you are afraid, especially then, maybe. I found myself smiling at that, a real and genuine smile that felt strange after everything, and yet entirely welcome. That sounds like something my grandmother would have said. Maybe she'd be proud of you, Grace offered gently, for choosing the way you did, back there, for helping the captain decide. I thought about that for a long moment, watching the distant light of stars I still could not name, thinking of a woman who had lived through her own version of impossible choices decades before I was ever born, who had chosen silence over pride when talking about her service, who had perhaps understood better than any of us the true weight of power like the one we had just awakened. I hope so, I finally said. I really do. Months later, long after the ash veil had returned to something resembling its ordinary cargo routes, I received official word that the mind aboard our ship would remain active, under careful new oversight, rather than being sealed away again as it once had been. Captain Bright had fought for that decision personally, arguing before review boards and skeptical officials that a power like this, once revealed, was better understood and carefully guided than hidden away in fearful denial, waiting to be misunderstood again by some future crew unprepared for what they might wake. I visited the lower chamber often after that, sometimes simply to sit quietly near the softly glowing sphere, sometimes to talk, sharing small updates about the ordinary rhythms of life aboard the ship that had once tried so hard to remain forgettable, and now, slowly, was becoming something else entirely. "Do you think we made the right choice?" I asked one evening, months after that first terrifying night. The memory of it softened now by distance and time, though never entirely faded. "I believe," the mind answered slowly, "that the right choice is rarely a single decision made once and then finished. It is something chosen again and again, each time circumstances test it. Your captain chose restraint when destruction was available. Your engineer chose understanding when fear would have been simpler. Your crew chose to stand together when running might have seemed safer. I do not know what future choices await this ship, or this crew, or your species more broadly. I only know that the choices made during those 2 days gave me reason to hope the answer will continue to be a good one." I sat with those words for a long while, the golden light washing gently over the quiet chamber, and somewhere far above us, beyond the hull of a ship that had once hunted, then hidden, then finally, truly awakened, the stars continued their patient, endless watch over everything that still remained to come. We had been hunted once, mistaken for something weak, something easy, something that could be taken without consequence. We had proven, in the end, that gentleness had always been a choice we made deliberately, never a weakness forced upon us by lack of strength. And somewhere out among those same distant stars, Word of that choice continued spreading, ship to ship, system to system, a quiet, steady reminder to anyone who might consider hunting us again. We were never truly prey. We had simply been waiting, patiently, for the right moment to remember exactly who we had always been,